Let me turn to another subject, though, and that was one raised by my colleague, Mr. Honda, and that is the spiraling of violence in Mexico. I had a chance to sit down with your counterpart, the Mexican Attorney General, 2 months ago, who talked about the mutually destructive trade between our countries, with narcotics flowing north and weapons flowing south, and in particular, just the prevalence of American weapons being imported into Mexico, sold through straw purchasers or acquired at gun shows or through whatever mechanism. And I want to ask you how we can do more to stem that flow of weapons into Mexico. We were devastated to see the loss of our consular official and his wife. We lost Mr. Salcido, a council member from California, in some of the horrific violence. And, of course, thousands of Mexican citizens are dying every year in what looks increasingly like Colombia used to look. So I'd be interested to know whether you think there are any legal changes that are necessary to crack down on this high volume of trafficking of weapons into Mexico. One disparity, for example, is you're required to disclose, I guess, if someone buys 5 or more handguns a month, but if they come and they buy 5 or more assault weapons, you're not required to disclose it, and so you don't have those law enforcement kind of leads. As we saw in the Excalibur case, some of the efforts to crack down on even high-volume sales to straw purchasers are problematic. And one of the issues, too, may be, do we have the resources and the priority among the U.S. Attorney offices to go after even the straw purchasers in a way that will let us climb the chain, much as sometimes you have to go after the drug runners to go after the cartel leaders. So if you could share your thoughts on how we can contribute to the effort in Mexico by stopping the flow of weapons into Mexico.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to do is to make sure that we have an ability from our Mexican counterparts to look at really basic things, the serial numbers of guns that are found in Mexico, so that we can trace them and find where they are being sold. I mean, what our history tells us is that a relatively small number of gun stores supply a disproportionate number of guns that are used in violent crimes, both in the United States and certainly in Mexico. And then to focus our attention using our ATF, state and local counterparts, to focus on those places where there is evidence, where there is a predicate to believe that they are engaged in the sale of weapons that end up in Mexico through straw purchases, through illegal straw purchases, illegal sales, perhaps to people with felony records. I mean, whatever it is, but to follow the evidence back to those places that are the sources of these guns. And I think one of the ways in which we can do that is by having a good interaction with our Mexican counterparts, and just by looking at the weapons that are seized. I mean, I've seen these. We have warehouses of these things, and they need to be preserved at least long enough for American law enforcement to get there and to obtain serial numbers, and then try to trace those serial numbers back.
Do we need to look at some of the sentencing provisions as well? I was informed, I had a meeting with some of your colleagues in ATF, and was informed about a recent case where someone was convicted of gun running into Mexico. I think 1,000 weapons were involved, and the sentence was 30-some-odd months. That seems like an awfully light sentence for someone that illegally exporting into Mexico 1,000 weapons, may see several killings as a result of those guns being illegally trafficked into the countries. Do we need to look at whether we have sufficient sentencing deterrents in place?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that case, but I think that's a very legitimate question that I think we should ask, and maybe look not only at that case but a larger number of cases to see who is it that's getting convicted of gun running to Mexico, and what kinds of sentences are they getting? If they seem to be low, is it because the statutes, the penalties that we have in the statutes are too low, or is there something else that's going on? But I think that is something that is a very legitimate inquiry that we should engage in. We have to have a deterrent effect. We can't make this something that people do without the thought that if caught, they're not going to face a very substantial penalty, given the impact that it has in Mexico, but not only in Mexico, the impact that it has in the United States. It makes the cartels stronger in Mexico and gives them a greater capacity to ship drugs to our country. And the violence that we see along our border is only fueled by these same weapons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.